Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Dirty Boots Capital. Today, I'm going to share a couple of articles with you. Um, Hopefully, you find them interesting. I've been researching them for a couple of days now, and yeah, it's uh, it's an interesting story here. In line with the story, I've worn my Freedom Baby T-shirt today to you know uh, show solidarity for our Canadian friends just north of the border here who are going through their set of issues with these mandates and continues to impact us all. Freedom, baby, it's what it's all about, or at least what it used to be about. So here we are today, and I want to talk a little bit about the semiconductor shortage that we are all experiencing. So let me pull up a couple of articles here. First one here is from Yahoo News. Semiconductor shortage has reached crisis levels, Commerce Secretary says. So this is our U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo says it's high time for lawmakers to pass legislation that helps end the crippling pandemic-fueled semiconductor shortage. Well, if you guys didn't shut down businesses, you wouldn't be in this case. But that's just my own editorial comment, I guess. Let's shut down Mr. Trump there. All right. And article goes on to say the median inventory of semiconductor products highlighted by buyers has fallen from 40 days in 2019 to less than 5 days. All that's saying is back in 2019, we used to have a 40-day supply of semiconductors. Today, we only had 5 days supply before we ran out. So that's all that's highlighting. Raimundo says we need to what we need is to make more chips in America. Yeah, sounds like a good idea. To that end, it would be helpful to the cause if lawmakers pass the Chips for America Act. All right, so anytime you see acts like that, Chips for America Act, question that, right? Because it's not all that it's cracked up to be. It's somewhat nefarious, I think, when they come out with things like that. So I just want to highlight that. So the industry's biggest players, such as Intel, are now waiting for the U.S. government to do its part and pass the $52 billion Chips for America Act. In June 2021, the Senate signed off on the legislation, which aims to incentivize U.S. manufacturing of semiconductors. All right, so let's stop here again. All right, last time I checked, Economics 101, when you have demand for a product, supply will come online to meet that demand, right? So here in this case, we have a need for more semiconductors, which we all understand. Okay, that's good. Why is the government feeling like they need to insert themselves into this and provide $52 billion in the Chips for America Act, right? It's ridiculous. Just let the free market do what it needs to do, and it'll find equilibrium, and it'll do it much more efficiently than with the government's help. So, okay, like as if, enormous demand wasn't enough to incentivize people, we have to give them $52 billion to the industry. All right. So chip giants like Intel, they aren't waiting around for lawmakers to act. Intel recently broke ground on 2 chip-making foundries in Arizona that are projected to cost $20 billion. Now, I believe they actually moved this project to Ohio. I have another article here I'll share with you. Again, from Yahoo Finance, Ohio promises $2.1 billion in incentives to lure chip maker Intel. And I love this, right? To lure chip maker Intel. It's kind of like, I don't know how they cannot feel dirty by using things like lure chip maker Intel. Intel is a huge, huge manufacturer. So I get it. These counties, these states want to increase their jobs, increase their GDP. I get it. But nowhere in my research of this topic have I found anything where people are looking at the impacts to the environment, right? To the water supply. What are large manufacturers like Intel doing? What is the EPA asking them to do to say, okay, we're going to give you $52 billion, or in this case from Ohio, $2.1 billion. What is Ohio asking of Intel in terms of regulations and making sure they're not polluting the drinking water for the population, right? The state of Ohio and its private economic development group offered Intel Corp 2.1 billion in incentives to lure the chip maker to the state. The chip maker announced last week that it will invest 20 billion to construct two fabrication plants on a 1,000-acre site in New Albany near Columbus. And so they've also been offered local property tax abatements will further enhance the 2.1 billion subsidy package. All right, so somebody needs to pay into the pot, right? So with all these new jobs being created, I suspect there's probably going to be more people coming to the state. More people bring more kids. More kids require more schools, more services, more everything, right? So how's that getting paid? If it's not Intel, does it go to the taxpayers? Probably. So be careful what we wish for. The state is offering 1.2 billion in cash incentives. Oh, so they're just going to give them cash. That's awesome. I wish somebody gave me cash, including a 600 million direct grant to the company to offset the construction costs, as well as 691 million to help cover the infrastructure costs. Intel is further eligible for a 30-year, 650 million job creation tax credit, obviously conditioned on Intel making good on pledges had to its Ohio payroll. Okay, that's good. At least they're tying it to something. So that's good. I'd like to see more about the environment and the impact on climate changes and all of that. All right, to land the 17 billion infrastructure. So now they're going on to talk about Samsung, right, which is also building another plant. To land the $17 billion investment from Samsung, state and local officials in Texas rolled out a package that include waiving most of the company's property taxes for 25 years. 25 freaking years. They don't have to pay property taxes. Wow. A $314 million reduction in school district taxes, and also a 27 million state grant. Okay, so again, this all sounds rosy, but at the end of the day, I think that taxpayers are going to take it on the chin with some of this stuff, right? So they go on to say, Intel is also counting on the U.S. to deliver additional financial incentives to support the expansion of domestic chip manufacturing. Congress is currently considering funding the CHIPS Act. This is the Chips for America Act, a measure that has passed in the Senate, but not the House. It would create a $50 billion pot of money for companies willing to locate production to the U.S. Again, I go back to, if there's demand, which there is, we should let the free market do what it's supposed to do, and these companies will bring the supply to market to meet that demand. We do not need the government stepping in to force that to happen. It'll happen, just organically, because that's how supply and demand works. All right, so you'll love this. So Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger said that while Intel is making the initial investment for the two factories in Ohio, planned expansion beyond that will be slower and possibly not as big if the CHIPS Act is not enacted. The truth of the matter here is Pat, the CEO of Intel, has just negotiated in 2021, I believe it was, a $116 million compensation package. And that's just for 1 year, $116 million in compensation. But what sort of moral hazard is this presenting in terms of, obviously he wants his compensation and he's going to push hard for this CHIPS Act, whether Intel needs it or not, right? Whether they need it or not. So I think there's some moral hazards there. All right, so let's go on to, so these were all recent articles back in the last week or so that I've been researching this. And so here's an article, Sustainalytics is the website. Waste not, want not, water use in the semiconductor industry. This is a freaking great article. I love it. And kudos to Ashwara Bashkaran. Sorry if I'm butchering your name, but you wrote a fantastic article here. And I highlighted, this was written back in March of 2017, right? So this was done before the pandemic. And so this is where the industry was back then. And so this comparison is super important to draw on, right? So she writes, this year's theme for the World Water Day is wastewater. It was aptly chosen given the United Nations prediction of a 55% increase in global water demand by 2050 as compared to 2000. To meet this demand, companies will need to manage wastewater far more efficiently than they do today. The risk of failing to do so becomes concrete when you look at a water-intensive industry such as semiconductors. Okay, so when we get to the bottom of this article, you'll see why I'm jumping up and down as to again, great that these manufacturing plants are coming to the States and they're setting up shop and building 2 plants here and 1 plant there and another plant someplace else. That's great to some degree. However, there needs to be pushback on what they're doing in terms of impacts to the environment and impacts to our water supply. I'm not seeing that in any of the media today. You know, all this good that's being done, you know, I guess I take a step back and I say, you know, when this pandemic was playing out and the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, the government was giving out free money, nobody in the government, none of the politicians were smart enough to look downstream and say, what is this going to do to our economy? What are the cause and effect scenarios that could play out, right? And so now, after all this free money, they're all up in arms screaming about inflation and how they're going to now fix that by raising the Fed funds rate and, you know, doing quantitative tightening and all these fancy things. Yeah, at the time they were blind to it, right? The same with when they, you know, they're giving out these stimmy checks to people right and left. And now we got people who have been conditioned that they don't have to go to work, right? So now we have this labor shortage, right? We have 10, I believe last report I saw was 10 million people aren't working, right? That able, they could. Many of those people could go to work to help the labor shortage, but they've been conditioned. Hey, I can stay home. I can, you know, I'll get free money from the government, right? Okay, so semiconductor manufacturing requires large volumes of ultra pure water to avoid the contamination of electrical devices. The typical semiconductor manufacturing facility uses 2 to 4 million gallons of ultra pure water per day. All right, in 2015, Intel, the largest semiconductor company by market cap, right? Our friends Intel used 9 billion gallons of water in 2015. Do you think they're going to be producing more semiconductors today than they did in 2015? Yeah, a lot more. All right. Semiconductor companies historically have incurred cleanup costs related to groundwater contamination of up to $100 million. Well, good. And they probably should have paid more. If they're contaminating the groundwater, they, they should clean up their act. Some companies are proactively meeting these challenges by mitigating related risks by reducing their reliance on chemicals and proactively improving the treatment of water before discharge. Good. That's a good thing. But let's look at this. ST Microelectronics, for example, recycled and reused 45% of the total water it withdrew in 2015. Okay, so great. They recycled and reused 45% of the total water. What happened to the other 55%? That's what I want to know. Where did it go? Right? So several semiconductor facilities are situated in arid regions, and it is here where the tensions between the needs of industry and the community will be most acute. Right? Again, these are the these are the second order effects that nobody is looking at. They're just looking at today. I got to solve the chip shortage today. And nobody is looking at what this is doing to the water supply, to the aquifers. These aquifers have been there for a long time. And when you drain them, right? When you're using, in Intel's case, 9 billion gallons in a year. And I'm sure that number is going to go up significantly. Yeah, that stuff doesn't replenish overnight. So again, back to the article. All right. Let's see. Showing good stewardship is essential to maintaining goodwill with regulators and local populations. Yeah, I think it takes more than stewardship. Intel is another example of a good water steward that reduced water use in arid regions. Okay, good. In 2015, the company reduced water withdrawal at its facility in Rio Rancho, New Mexico by 40% compared to 2010. All right, good. But 40% is still a shit ton of water, people. Last time I checked. So, and now they're building even more plants. Okay. So I highlighted this one in red because I think it's super important. And again, this was 2017, and now in 2022, I don't think we're any closer to having an answer here. But disclosure, right? Disclosure on water use remains poor and incoherent. There is currently no industry standard for reporting on water use. Why the hell isn't there? This is like the single most important factor in terms of determining, where these plants set up and what's happening in that community. I mean, imagine these plants set up, and it wouldn't be the first time where, they either pollute the water supply of a community or they use it all up. And now these folks with wells are saying, my well's dried up. Who's going to take care of them? What's the government going to do? The government's going to come in and what? Give them pennies on the dollar to buy their house? That's not what these families wanted, right? So nobody's looking at these second order effects. So with the changing climate, water risks are likely to escalate in many regions, which could trigger stricter regulations on water efficiency and discharge. Well, I certainly hope so. And I just really want to walk it back to, let's look at what the Fed and the government, the politicians did over the last 2 years, creating, trillions and trillions of dollars and free money to the people without looking at the second order effects, and essentially kicking that can down the road. And here we are today, sitting in a place with inflation at 7%, right? And people having to make decisions whether they buy groceries or whether they buy their prescription drugs, right? This is real. This is real, people, right? So here we are again, same situation. where politicians, Gina Raimondo, Secretary of Commerce, saying, hey, let's give the industries $52 billion, right? Not sure where that money's coming from, but okay, I guess they'll just print it. So they get the $52 billion. What happens to the people? What happens to the community? What happens to those natural resources? Those natural resources just don't, regenerate overnight. So just another case of where this country, where this government is just kicking the can down the road for the next generation to solve, and why I say I really worry about that next generation for a lot of different reasons. So hopefully you find that this story, these articles interesting, and you'll share it with others to be able to just spread the education around. So if you like this video, please give me a like. If it's some interesting topics, please subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be doing more stories like this, and you all take care of each other out there. Thank you.